Hi Year 10, so today's focus is going to be on Afternoons by Philip Larkin, so you need to turn to page 17 in your poetry anthologies. Okay, so I'm just going to start off by outlining why I think this poem is fantastic. It's one of my favourites in the anthology. I'd probably say that about 6 poems. But I like to start with an anecdote, as you know. I first read this when I was about 22. I was 22. I just got out of uni. And I just started my first full-time job as a teaching assistant, and I was really realising how boring being an adult is and how repetitive it is, and you do the same thing every day. Not that teaching assistants was an awful job, just the idea of you get up at the same time, you eat your breakfast, you get on the same train. So this poem, as you'll soon see, kind of came along at the right moment, and even though it's quite a pessimistic poem, it's quite negative and it can make you feel bit down about the way we've set things up for ourselves as adults, and it might make you feel like, oh no, I don't want to grow up. Sometimes it's nice to read a poem that helps you to realize that it's not just you who feels a certain way, or that this is a universal problem and it's not just our society or our town or my specific life. So that's why I really like it. Why I really took to it when I was 22. I think as I've got older, it has felt more pessimistic. So you might find the same when you come back to this poem when you're in your 30s. But you've got lots to look forward to before I start this poem and make you all think that adulthood is rubbish. Okay, so the reason this poem is really important is because it's what I call a hybrid poem. I think I've mentioned this before. So it's a poem that you can use for multiple themes. So it's really useful. Like you can use it for a variety of comparisons, and obviously we'll move on to look at what you can compare it to once we've finished analysing this. So we're going to read it first, then we'll explore the title, and then we'll read it again before I take you through all of the analysis. Okay? So, afternoons. Summer is fading. The leaves fall in ones and twos from trees bordering the new recreation ground. In the hollows of afternoons, young mothers assemble at swing and sandpit, setting free their children. Behind them, at intervals, stand husbands in skilled trades, an estate full of washing, and the albums, lettered Our Wedding, lying near the television. Before them, the wind is ruining their courting places. There are still courting places, but the lovers are all in school. And their children, so intent on finding more unripe acorns, expect to be taken home. Their beauty has thickened. Something is pushing them to the side of their own lives. So if we just look at the title, first of all, because as we've talked about with unseen poetry, it's always a really good place to start in terms of the tone the writer's trying to set and the focus of the poem. So afternoons is obviously a period of time. And it's a plural, which suggests that all afternoons are the same. It's not the afternoon or an afternoon. These are these mothers' afternoons. Every single one is the same. You might go further and see it as a period of time in life. So, for example, if we see the morning as sort of our childhood, and then we see the evening as when we're elderly, then the afternoons could be a symbol of adulthood, that sort of middle period of the day. And let's just explore those connotations of that period of the day. So you might see it as this sort of undefined period of time. Like when does an afternoon start and end? Our afternoons, especially in our society today, are very much defined by work or school. When we get out of school, we kind of feel like it's getting towards evening, don't we? Even though when you're off on a Saturday, 10 to 3 would feel like the middle of the afternoon. So it's a very flexible time. And you could see it as a time period between like a productive morning where you get up and you get everything done, and then a relaxing evening. Like the mornings and evenings are very defined in our society. We kind of know what to do with those times a day. Or obviously, in an evening, it's all about having fun, isn't it, and leisure. That middle period, both of life and of your day, can feel maybe empty sometimes. What can I fill my afternoon with? And that is supported in the poem by the word hollows, the hollows of afternoon, the emptiness of afternoons. I'm just going to pause there to give you time to jot that down. Actually, what makes more sense if you just pause the video, and I'll do that in future. So if you haven't finished writing that down, pause the video now. Okay, so now we are going to read it again, but again, rather than me reading it to you this time, can you just pause the video and take your time reading through it again? Now you've kind of had that insight into the title, and you should have got the gist of some things on the first reading. Read it again now and see what else you can pick up on. Okay, welcome back. So we are now, I'm just going to go over some key vocab that you might be unfamiliar with. Apologies if you think that I am teaching you to suck eggs. So recreation ground is just a place for children to play in. If you want to label that if you're not sure. And then courting places is a very old-fashioned word. Maybe your nan or granddad might say it. So it's an old-fashioned word for places where you would go dating, or courting is an old-fashioned word for dating. So the places you'd go for alone time or as a date. In our high school, around the back of the sports hall was where you'd go to spend alone time with your boyfriend or girlfriend during the school day, or there might be a certain wall you'd hang out on of an evening, or obviously more traditional date places like restaurants, cinemas, etc. Again, just pause the video now if you need more time to jot that down. Okay, so before we launch into the poem, I'm just going to go through some contextual factors that obviously you do need to refer to in your exam, because you do get marked for context. You might prefer to write these on a separate piece of lined paper, or you might want to write them on the bottom of your poem underneath it. It's up to you. If you do write them on a separate paper, please don't lose it or forget about it. You might want to, near the time of your exam, put the context notes on a cue card and staple them to the poem, just so it's all in one place. I'd hate for you to just totally forget about or lose all your context notes. So the first thing we're going to look at is Larkin's style, in terms of you will get marks if you can kind of pin down how this poem fits into Larkin's sort of wider style and his work. So Larkin is known for being very cynical and very pessimistic, as you might have already picked up on. So pessimistic, remember, is when you look at things negatively and you see the sort of negative side of things. Cynical, he's not an idealistic person. He's not someone who will try and see the best of something through his poetry. He's very much about exposing the way we live and making us think about things that we do every day and thinking again about them, really. And there is a sense of emptiness to his poetry. There is a sense of sort of almost accepting that maybe there isn't meanings to certain things that we do. So he focuses on the mundane parts of life, and he also focuses on the bigger parts of our life, so our legacy, especially in this poem, is taken from the Whitsun Weddings, which is a collection of poems. You don't need to remember that for your exam, but within that book of poetry there is a lot of focus on legacy, death, marriage, childhood, boredom, the passing of time. Pause there if you haven't managed to get that down. Okay, the more interesting element of the context is obviously how the time period is represented by the poem or reflected, or how the time period has shaped the poem. So I'm going to take you back to 1959. That was when the poem was written. So obviously a long time ago, and society has changed a lot since then, but in some ways it hasn't changed at all, and in some ways you could argue it's got worse. So this was obviously following World War II, a good, some maths, 14 years after, and families had very much settled back down into this nuclear structure where, two adults and children. Young marriages and parents were very much the norm. You got to the age of 18, you got married, you moved out, and you would get married before you lived with your partner, and then you'd have children, and that would be it. So there was a very restricted options for sort of the working and lower middle classes. That was just what you did. The second wave of feminism had not yet happened, so you kind of need to take yourself back to a time where everyone was very traditional in their gender roles. Women were predominantly domestic, so they stayed at home, even despite the fact that they had gone to work during World War II. And I know this is the cusp of the 60s, which we see as like the freedom decade. I don't know if you remember from the Love Poetry did last year that we talked about that. However, you've got to remember that Larkin's describing adults in 1959, so these would, their children would have been part of, like, the revolution of the free loving hippie swinging 60s. I've just totally made that description up. But these adults will have grown up with a very sort of rigid social structure. And as well, you've got to remember that having come out of World War II with rations and obviously the great loss of life and just the tragedy of the Holocaust, having a home and a job and a family seemed relatively fantastic compared to that. So people had very sort of different expectations and different values at the time, and you do need to link these factors to the words in the poem when you're writing your essay. So pause here now if you've not managed to get that down. Okay, again, before we launch into the poem, I'm just going to go through sort of bigger picture things. So the narrative choices, tenses, organisation. Again, you can add these to notes underneath your context, or you can put them at the bottom of your poem. There are pages at the back of your anthology as well, if you want to put them there. So, excuse me, sorry. The first thing to highlight is that Larkin is very focused on the women. He does put them at the forefront, and he's very focused on their lifestyles. But he does represent everyone in the family. We do get an insight into the children, and we get an insight into the husbands. It is written in the third person. This is not told from the mother's perspective. It's not told from the children's perspective or the husband's perspective. We are seeing the speaker's perspective, and we're not sure who that person is, but they are an outsider looking in. And we must be cautious, therefore, because, this is not a first-hand experience. Of course, Larkin, not being a woman at that time period in this area of traditional gender roles, would have made him unsuitable for that insight anyway. So this is how it looks on the outside to him as a person who sort of, who didn't have his own children. And it's also written in present tense, and this is in addition to the generic plural title afternoons, which suggests that this routine is ongoing. It's very repetitive. This is not something that's happened in the past. This is happening now. There is one exception to that, and we'll get to that line in the poem when we get to it. Great sentence. Okay, pause here if you've not managed to write that down. Thank you. All right, second section of bigger picture notes. The first, so I'm just going to take you through like a summary of each stanza. You don't necessarily need to write this down, but it will help you kind of just navigate through the poem. So the first stanza deals with the environment that the mothers spend their time in and what they do in an afternoon. Then the second stanza broadens out. That's a nice phrase to remember for your essays. It broadens out. It gives us a wider perspective of their lives. So we learn about their husbands and their marriage and their chores, and we get more of an insight into their home. And then the third stanza brings an end to the afternoon by focusing more on their relationship with their children and what they've lost as time has passed. Again, pause here if you'd like to jot that down. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through potential themes that you could be asked to this poem. This is not an exhaustive list. And I'm only going to focus on the top two, and we're going to start with nature. So I've selected some key quotations, not loads, you've only got 20 minutes in your exam, that you would use and would be useful if you were given the theme of nature. And nature can encompass time, but also our environments. So if you want to colour code your annotations, you might use one colour for all of the nature annotations and another colour for the people and places. However, bear in mind that there might be an overlap with the quotations. So, you might want to like double colour some of the quotations. Okay, so looking at the theme of nature then, just for stanza 1 first of all. So, do this in note form, please. You do not have to copy this down word for word. So, we've got at the beginning, summer is fading. We've got this idea of the natural passing of time. Autumn is next, obviously, after summer. And seasons can symbolise different stages in life. So, like we spoke about afternoons as being the middle of life, with morning being childhood, evening being our old age. So too could spring be our childhood and winter be our old age. So are the mothers finishing the summer of their lives, that, the peak of happiness, the peak of joy, etc., and are they moving on to the autumn? And that's something that kind of Larkin suggests by this opening. That verb fading suggests a really subtle change. It's not that you wake up one day and think, oh, I'm going to, press conference in the background, schools are closing. So on Friday. Okay, so you can still finish this PowerPoint. Glad to know you'll be safe at home, guys. That's really good news. So fading suggests a really subtle change. So nature and time move subtly, obviously. We don't wake up one day and think, oh, I'm suddenly old. It happens very gradually. But there's a sense also with fading that you can't control it, you can't stop it. If it was an urgent or rapid action, maybe you could hold it off, but you can't. Nature is the most powerful thing, and I think it's important to pin that down because there's other poems and comparative points you can make. There's plenty of other poems in Anthology that highlight that. Sorry, do you want to pause there so you can get that down? Okay, the leaves falling ones and twos is another obviously natural image. We've got part of autumn's process here. Are the mothers the trees, you might ask yourself? Are they slowly shedding parts of themselves? And I think falling ones and twos is such a beautiful image. It suggests, like, again, this idea of it being very gradual, and again, a sense of routine. There's ones and then there's twos. And it's just such a sort of gentle image of them falling to the floor, them shedding parts of themselves. Pause there if you need to get that down. And then we move on to this very unnatural image, the trees bordering the new recreation ground. Bordering certainly suggests a sense of entrapment, like it's bordering the ground. It's think of borders of countries, borders, and how they shut people out. It's a very unnatural image because trees don't naturally do that. Trees didn't grow back in the day to define a border that we've constructed. They've been planted there to add structure to this landscape, and that can really symbolize the restrictions placed upon the women and their lifestyles and just society as a whole, really. So just pause here to get that down. Okay, carrying on with nature then for stanza 2. So across this stanza, we have got a very distinct lack of nature in terms of traditional nature. We've got a lot of manufactured goods, washing, album, television, which kind of suggests that the family's life and the home is filled with unnatural elements, things that weren't meant to be. And there's a feeling here that, represented through the nature, that these lives aren't natural, that there's something has gone wrong, and Larkin's maybe suggesting that the family unit and the family lifestyle is not ideal. It's not what we were made to do naturally. And before them, the wind is ruining their courting places. Obviously, the wind is an exception to what I've said about distinct lack of nature. Wind is definitely a natural force. It's a very powerful force and is apparently ruining their courting places, which, if you think of the wind as symbolizing time, time is ruining their courting places, because if you look out the top line of stanza 3, it says that are still courting places, but the lovers are all in school. So it's not literally ruining the places because other people are still using them. It's just younger people. So they're ruined for them personally because they're no longer accessible to the mothers. They're too old. So time, symbolized by the wind, has blown away the chance for romance and dating and courting, and adulthood and family life has forced them to move on from that. And then ruined really suggests that it's gone forever, which you can link to the idea that perhaps Larkin's saying that you can't turn back time. Okay, pause here if you need more time to get those down. Okay, in the last stanza then, we have a focus on the children and a slightly different focus with regards to nature. So children unlike the mothers and the fathers, are actually able to interact with nature. They're more free, they're less constrained, and we can see that through the fact that they're finding more unripe acorns. So the adult life, the manufactured world that humans have created for themselves as adults, doesn't apply to children, and they are able to kind of interact with nature. So the unripe acorns could symbolize the children themselves, like adulthood is not ready for them yet. They're still learning, etc. They're still exploring. And unripe acorns, it turns out, cannot be eaten, but you can eat ripe acorns. So perhaps that's just a coincidence. But maybe Larkin suggesting here that society can't use and shape children as it can adults, that they still belong to nature, and it's only when we get older that we kind of start to be restricted and defined by our roles and what we can contribute to society. And he certainly presents that in a negative way, because if we wanted to be anyone in this poem, we would want to be the children. The children have freedom, they have control, they're off exploring, and they're in nature. Oh God, they've just said exams aren't a plague place. Okay, so we get the sense that something is a natural force. It's not a person, it's not the children even, it's just a thing. So we feel like that's something natural. Perhaps it's time. So time is pushing them to the side. They're being replaced by their children, perhaps. It's the cycle of life. As you get older, you get pushed to the side. Other people come in who are better than you, younger than you, etc. And maybe that is to Larkin what it means to become a mother, that you do have to step aside, and you don't have to see that as a negative thing. That could be a beautiful thing. Remember, this is an outsider looking in, and you can always evaluate and realize that this is a very selective portrayal of what it means to be in a family from one speaker's perspective, from a very cynical poet. But essentially that is certainly what we're left with, the feeling that to be an adult, to become a mother, to become part of a family unit, is to be pushed to the side, to lose control, and sort of give in to the power of time, which of course none of us can beat. Time will come for us all. Okay, pause there if you need to get those notes down. Right. Next steps. So you've got 8 quotations there for the theme of nature. That is absolutely plenty, but I did want to give you some time to sort of step back and reflect on what I've just gone through, and make sure you've not got any questions or uncertainties. So I want you to pause the video now for about 10 minutes, and I want you to either write down on a piece of paper any further ideas you have, or things this poem is making you think about, or how what are your personal feelings towards the poem, or if you've got any things that you're not sure about or you need clarification, can you write down your questions? I would like you to then carousel around the room, read as many people's ideas as you can, and then obviously go back and add anything great that you read to your annotations. But also, can you help others out by answering the questions if you know their answers? If you do have unanswered questions, I will tell you what to do at the end of the video. Okay, so pause the video now to do that for me, please. All right, we're now going to move on to look at the theme of people and places. And, this will cover an element of women and lifestyle. You can see already within nature, we've covered a bit of women and lifestyle as well. All right, so back to stanza 1. So we're going to ignore the first 2 lines for this theme, and we're going to look at from trees bordering. So the bordering trees suggest that the people are trapped in their environment. I did allude to that or comment on that a little bit earlier. It's bordering this ground that they're allowed to take their children to. Again, if you want to look at that positively, it makes it safe. This is a defined space for children, but the word bordering does very much suggest like restriction and entrapment. The adjective new for the new recreation ground does suggest that children are more invested than adults, perhaps, and that adults have to spend time in places that aren't built for them. This is something that's been created for children, and that's further supported by swing and sandpit. These are nouns that we very much only associate with children. That the adults are going to spend their time at. We don't get the feeling that the mothers are going to be jumping in the sandpit and going on the swings. And finally, there's a lovely contrast here between the children who are free or set free by their children. So there might be an element there that, you know, they're not always feeling free. Sometimes the mothers are in control of them. But it certainly contrasts here with the mothers who are assembling as though they're in the military. And again, you know, it suggests routine, order, restrictions on the mothers, and builds on that idea of bordering and entrapment. So pause here if we need to get those notes down. Okay, stanza 2. So there's a very, you know, we've got 2 lines here that encapsulate the husband, and that's all it takes. He says an awful lot in these 2 lines. So firstly, we've got the preposition behind them, which suggests that the men obviously are behind the women. Now, you might look at this in terms of the fact that the speaker is focusing on the domestic side of life, which men don't participate in, and therefore they have to be in the background. But also, of course, they are in the background during the work day because they're at work. Intervals could represent the fact that they do shifts, and they don't only do shifts at work, but they also do shifts at home. They're at home a limited amount of time, whereas the women are always at home. And this lovely verb stand. The husbands are standing in their skilled trades. That again suggests that their work is really inactive. It's really monotonous. You know, there's no flexibility or movement in the work. There's certainly not the sense that they're having a great career. And there's the sense that they'll be trapped forever in the same trade. And it kind of reflects the lack of career progression at the time. You know, you'd be lucky to get a trade job and you'd get skilled at that, and that would be you. And certainly, if you compare to nowadays, we have much more flexibility in our job market. In the next section of the stanza, he's really focusing on a wedding album, which kind of symbolises a marriage. So the verb lying near the television, the wedding album lying near the television, suggests that it's really no longer growing. It's, again, inactive. It's just lying there. They're not engaging with their marriage or the romance or the love for each other. It just sits next to the new focus of their lives, which is the television. Even the word near, which is very vague, you know, suggests that it's carelessly placed. You know, they're not paying attention. It's not something that they're prioritizing. And finally, before them, the wind. So the word before obviously contrasts with the word behind, as in before them is in front of them. So it suggests that both adults, or perhaps just the mothers, can see that time is stripping them of their favourite places outside of the home. They can see the wind ruining these places for them, which perhaps makes it more tragic. You know, they're not ignorant to the fact that they're losing things from their life. So again, it adds this feeling of entrapment, and if you add that to the hyperbolic estate full of washing, as if there's enough washing to fill an estate of houses, you know, it's a symbol of the never-ending chores in domestic life. And again, that suggests entrapment. So pause here so you can get these notes down. Okay, finally, so we've got the 3rd stanza, and we've already talked about this idea that there are still courting places, but the lovers are all in school. So this suggests that the courting places only exist for young people. And again, same as the new recreation grounds, the swing and the sandpit, it seems like urban places are designed for children and exclude adults, arguably. We've also got this lovely verb, the children expect to be taken home. And, sorry, I've not put the quotation marks on. Oh no, sorry, never mind. Again, there's a sense here that the children in control, and also that they want to be taken home. If you want to read it a bit more positively than probably what Larkin intended, you know, there's a sense of safety there. They obviously want to go home, even if the mothers don't. And again, it indicates that the children are in control. Then finally, this is probably one of the richest lines in the entire poem. Their beauty has thickened. So obviously their beauty is their mother's beauty. And Larkin here is alluding to society's preoccupation with women's beauty, and therefore a woman's tendency herself to focus on her own beauty as a symbol of her desirability. If you're raised in a world that tells you as a woman that you'll be judged based on how you look, you can't help but prioritize that and focus on it. And to lose that is actually, is something that a lot of women have to deal with and can be quite difficult. So the word thickened here, it's a verb, suggests that it's congealed or it's seizing up the faces. It might also refer to sort of wrinkles as well as like thickening of the skin and lines across the face, even though technically I think wrinkles are because your skin is getting thinner. This is do you remember I said before that there is a line that's in past tense? This is it. So this is the only past tense verb in the poem, thickened. It has thickened. It's already happened. It cannot be stopped. And it is, unlike the rest of the poem and the lifestyle, which is present tense and repetitive, this has just happened and it's done. That process is over already. It's not thickening. It's gone. It's thickened. Suggesting it can't be stopped. And I feel like this, in conjunction with the last line, something is pushing them to the side of their own lives that we talked about earlier. It really suggests that women are past their prime, that the autumn has begun, which links us back nicely to that first line about the leaves falling in ones and twos and summer fading. Pause here so you can get those down. Okay, I'd now like you to repeat those same next steps again that you did previously. So write down questions or further ideas and carousel, and then press play again when you've finished. Okay, so next steps, that's the end of the video really, but if you've got any questions that you don't get answered in class from your peers, then please will you just ask me them underneath the video and I will answer them directly. If for some reason I don't manage to upload this video in a format you can do that, then just email me or message me on Show My Homework. I am going to upload some extra notes on Larkin to show my homework, just in case you feel you need them. And if you finish this halfway through a lesson, can you please just continue with your poetry, terminology, revision, mind maps? That's a bit of a mouthful. And if that's not suitable, i.e. you've already finished that, then obviously you can be revising for your application assessments. Although given the news that's just come up, you will obviously have a lot of extra time to do that. Thanks for listening, guys, and please do let me know if this was an effective way of teaching you, because obviously now schools are closing and you will be off. I'm very keen to keep on doing this for you if you think it works, so do let me know. And I'm now going to rewind BBC News so I can listen to what our Prime Minister said. Please look after yourselves while you're off and take care. Okay, I'm looking forward to seeing you again.